The Alaskan wind, a cruel, unseen sculptor, had already begun its nightly work, chiseling away at the edges of Elara's resolve. Inside her small, isolated cabin near the foothills of the Chugach Mountains, the crackle of the meager fire did little to dispel the biting cold that seeped through the chinks in the logs. It had been 3 days since Thomas, her husband, had left for the distant trapping grounds, promising to be back by the second sunset. 3 sunsets had come and gone, each painting the sky with a fleeting, desperate beauty, before plunging the world into a vast, indifferent darkness. Elara clutched a worn wool blanket tighter around her shoulders, her eyes fixed on the frost-patterned window pane. Outside, the blizzard howled, a relentless symphony of despair. Snow, thick and unforgiving, piled against the cabin walls, burying the world in a pristine, deadly blanket. Every gust of wind seemed to whisper Thomas's name, carrying with it the phantom scent of pine and his reassuring presence. But there was no presence, only the suffocating emptiness that had grown with each passing hour. Fear, cold and sharp as an icicle, had begun to truly set in. Thomas was experienced, hardy, a man who knew the unforgiving rhythms of this land better than anyone. Yet the ferocity of this particular storm was uncommon, even for the Alaskan winter. She remembered his last words, a light-hearted promise to bring back enough furs to buy her that little silver locket she admired in Juneau. The memory twisted in her gut, a cruel contrast to the grim reality unfolding. She stood and walked to the door, pressing her ear against the rough wood. The wind was a living entity out there, a predator. She imagined Thomas, battling against its might, his strong frame pushing through the drifts. A flicker of hope, stubborn and fragile, ignited within her. He would be fine. He had to be. He always came back to her, but even as the thought formed, a shiver, unrelated to the cold, ran down her spine. The silence, when the wind momentarily lulled, was far more terrifying than its roar. It was the silence of a world consumed, a world where a man could vanish without a trace. If you're enjoying this story and want to follow this emotional journey to its conclusion, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Dawn broke, not with a burst of golden light, but with a muted, bruised purple that offered little comfort. The blizzard had not abated. If anything, it seemed to have intensified its cruel embrace. Elara had not slept, her body a coiled spring of anxiety and exhaustion. She had stoked the fire relentlessly, an instinctual act against the encroaching cold and the even colder dread in her heart. Every creak of the cabin, every shift of the wind, made her heart leap, only to fall back with a sickening thud. She was pacing now, a frantic dance in the confined space. The supplies were dwindling, but that was a secondary worry. Thomas was her primary concern, his absence a gaping wound. Suddenly, through a brief, almost imperceptible lull in the storm's fury, she saw it. A dark, indistinct shape moving against the swirling white backdrop. Her breath hitched. Was it an animal? A trick of the light and snow? Her eyes strained, desperate to pierce the opaque veil of the blizzard. The shape grew larger, more defined. It was a man. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a drumbeat of hope and terror. Could it be Thomas? He was walking slowly, almost stumbling, a heavy burden on his back. As he drew closer through the shifting snow, Elara saw the distinct dark green of a familiar heavy wool coat, the very one Thomas always wore for his long treks. A cry, half relief, half agony, tore from her throat. It was him. He was alive. She fumbled with the frozen latch, her hands shaking so violently she almost dropped the wooden bar. The door groaned open, letting in a blast of icy air and swirling snow. "Thomas!" she screamed, her voice hoarse from disuse and emotion. But the figure, now only a few yards away, did not respond with the usual warmth of Thomas's greeting. He continued to trudge forward, his head down, as if battling an unseen force. Then he looked up. The man was closer now, close enough for Elara to see him clearly through the swirling snow. He was tall, broad-shouldered, just like Thomas. And the coat, it was undeniably Thomas's, the one she had mended countless times, with its distinctive leather patches on the elbows. Yet as he lifted his head, a jolt of pure, disorienting shock went through her. This was not Thomas. His face was weathered, etched with lines of hardship, and though his features were obscured by a thick beard and the frost clinging to his eyelashes, they were not her husband's beloved face. His eyes, though weary, held a piercing intensity that Thomas's gentler gaze never possessed. He was a stranger, wrapped in the coat that was a second skin to her husband, a garment steeped in memories of home and warmth. Elara recoiled, her initial rush of relief morphing into a cold dread. Who are you?" she stammered, her voice barely a whisper against the wind's shriek. The man took another heavy step forward, his gaze fixed on her. He looked utterly exhausted, his body swaying slightly. He reached out a gloved hand, not in threat, but almost as if for support. Then, in a voice rough and raspy, as if unused for days, he spoke. "Elara." Her name. He knew her name. The single word hung in the biting air, a profound shock. How could this stranger who had emerged from the heart of the blizzard, wrapped in her missing husband's coat, know her name? 1,000 terrifying possibilities flooded her mind, each one worse than the last. Had he found Thomas? Was Thomas hurt? Or worse, had this man taken the coat? A new, horrifying wave of grief and anger washed over her, replacing the initial confusion. The stranger stumbled forward, collapsing onto her porch, a heavy thud against the wooden planks. The sheer exhaustion was evident in every line of his slumped body. Elara, despite her fear, reacted instinctively, pulling him inside, away from the deadly embrace of the blizzard. He was heavier than he looked, and she strained to drag him further into the cabin, closer to the warmth of the struggling fire. As she pulled him, a small, leather-bound pouch slipped from an inner pocket of Thomas's coat, landing softly on the wooden floor. It was Thomas's trapping journal, the one he always carried. "Who are you?" she repeated, her voice firmer now, a desperate demand for answers. The man lay still for a moment, his chest heaving. Then, with immense effort, he pushed himself up onto an elbow, his eyes dark and haunted, meeting hers. "My name is Kael," he rasped, his voice still hoarse. I found him." The words hit her like a physical blow. "Found him," she whispered, her heart seizing. "Where? Is he all right?" A terrible premonition coiled in her stomach. Kael pushed himself to a sitting position, leaning heavily against the wall. His gaze was full of a profound sadness, a look that confirmed her deepest fears before he even spoke another word. He swallowed hard, his throat working. He was caught. In the blizzard. A sudden whiteout. He was trying to make it back. To you. Tears, hot and stinging, welled in Elara's eyes, blurring the outlines of the small cabin. She knew. She had known deep down, in the cold, desolate corner of her heart, but hearing it, spoken by a stranger wearing Thomas's coat, made it undeniably, crushingly real. Thomas was gone. The silence in the cabin, punctuated only by the crackle of the fire and the distant howl of the wind, was a new, heavier kind of silence now, the silence of loss. Don't let the story end here. Subscribe to the channel to continue watching The Echo in the Snow and discover what happens next. Days bled into a blur of raw grief and the unsettling presence of Kael. The blizzard finally retreated, leaving behind a landscape of pristine, deadly beauty. Elara moved like a ghost through her own home, numb, but a part of her mind, a sharp, cruel part, kept circling back to Kael. He had delivered the unimaginable news, wrapped in the very fabric of her husband's last moments. He had eaten sparingly, his eyes often fixed on the flickering flames, a silent, weary companion to her sorrow. One afternoon, as the weak winter sun cast long blue shadows across the snow-covered land, Elara found the strength, or perhaps the desperate need, to confront him properly. He was sitting by the window, staring out at the frozen wilderness. "Tell me," she said, her voice strained but resolute, "tell me everything. How did you find him? And why are you wearing his coat?" Kael turned slowly, his gaze heavy with unspoken burdens. He reached a hand to the collar of the heavy wool coat, his fingers tracing the worn fabric. "I was caught in the same storm," he began, his voice softer now, less strained. "My own cabin was further north. I lost my way in the whiteout. I was close to giving up when I stumbled upon him. He was sheltering in a small ice cave, barely alive. He was badly frozen, weak." He paused, a shadow passing over his face. "He knew he wouldn't make it. He made me promise to find you, to tell you he loved you, and to give you this." Kael reached into an inner pocket and pulled out a small, intricately carved wooden bird, a wren. It was a gift Thomas had carved for her before they were married, a symbol of his quiet, enduring love. Elara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The small bird felt cold in her trembling fingers, yet it burned with Thomas's presence. Kael's story, delivered in fragments over the next few hours, began to paint a grim yet strangely comforting picture. He described Thomas's final moments with a stark, brutal honesty that left Elara both heartbroken and strangely relieved. Thomas had fought even in his last breaths, not for himself, but for her, for the life they had built together. He had spoken of her endlessly, of their small cabin, of the future they'd planned, and of his profound regret at not returning home. He had entrusted Kael with the carved wooden bird, that simple, cherished token of their love, and with his most precious possession, his heavy wool coat. "He insisted I take it," Kael explained, his voice low, tinged with a solemnity that mirrored the gravity of the moment. "Said it would give me a chance to survive. He knew the coat's warmth, its familiarity to you. He said you'd know, you'd understand once you saw it. It was proof of his last wish, that I find you and deliver his message, that he loved you until his last breath." Kael looked genuinely pained as he recounted the harrowing details, his eyes reflecting the deep respect he held for Thomas's final act of selfless love. The sheer weight of that trust was evident in his gaze. Elara listened, tears flowing freely now, but there was a profound release in them. The raw, jagged edges of her initial frantic grief began to soften, replaced by a deep, profound sorrow, mingled with a fierce pride for Thomas's immense bravery. Kael had honored Thomas's dying wish, enduring the same deadly blizzard and emerging a reluctant messenger of tragedy. She looked at the coat again, draped over Kael's weary form, no longer seeing it as a symbol of horror or a grim discovery, but as a final, tangible embrace from her beloved husband, a precious, physical link to his last moments. The harsh reality of the situation began to settle in, firm and unyielding. Thomas was undeniably gone, and Kael, a stranger, was now here, a spectral bridge between her past and an uncertain future. He was dependent on her for shelter and food until the spring thaw allowed him to travel, a necessary burden in her isolated existence. The small cabin, once a vibrant haven for two, now held a grieving widow and a haunted man, bound by a shared, painful secret in the vast, indifferent Alaskan wilderness. The responsibility weighed heavily on Elara, a new kind of pressure, but a quiet resolve began to stir within her. In the vast, silent cold, she was not utterly alone. The days that followed established a quiet, almost domestic routine between Elara and Kael. The initial shock and acute grief slowly receded into a dull, persistent ache, allowing practicalities to surface and dominate their waking hours. Kael, despite his own evident weariness and the lingering shadows in his eyes, was a man of quiet, unassuming strength. He quickly integrated himself into the rhythms of cabin life, helping with the relentless chores, expertly chopping and stacking wood, diligently mending traps, and even methodically repairing a stubbornly leaky spot in the cabin roof. His movements were efficient, deliberate, and his silence was comfortable, not imposing, a natural counterpoint to Elara's quiet sorrow. He spoke little about himself, offering no grand stories, but his actions spoke volumes about his character and resilience. Elara, in turn, found a strange, unexpected solace in his unwavering presence. The cabin, which had felt so empty and cold, so utterly desolate after Thomas's departure, now held a different kind of warmth. It wasn't the vibrant warmth of shared history or intimate companionship, but the quiet understanding that comes from surviving a shared, profound trauma. They would often sit by the fire in the evenings, the only sound the gentle crackle of the logs and the distant whispers of the wind, their gazes lost in the dancing flames. Elara found herself observing him, trying to decipher the depths of the man who had brought her such devastating news, yet also an unexpected sense of not being utterly alone in her grief. One evening, as a fresh blanket of pristine snow fell silently outside, muffling the world in a soft, white hush, Elara noticed Kael sketching in a small, worn notebook by the soft, flickering light of a lantern. His hands, though rough and calloused from the harsh labor of the wilderness, moved with surprising delicacy and precision. Curiosity, a feeling she hadn't genuinely experienced in weeks, a tiny spark of interest, prompted her to speak. "What are you drawing?" she asked, her voice soft, almost hesitant, breaking the comfortable silence. Kael looked up, a flicker of genuine surprise in his deep-set eyes, as if caught in a private moment. He hesitated for a long moment. Then, with a quiet sigh, he turned the notebook and showed her. It was a remarkably detailed and evocative drawing of the Chugach Mountains, their snow-capped peaks rising majestically against a starry, almost impossibly vast sky. He had captured the raw, untamed beauty of their surroundings with an artist's keen eye and a skillful hand. I used to draw before I came to the wild," he mumbled, a rare, fleeting glimpse into his past, a hint of a life before the unforgiving wilderness claimed him. Elara felt a quiet shift in their dynamic, a subtle but significant deepening of the unspoken bond forged in shared tragedy and enduring silence. As winter tightened its grip, the isolation intensified, a palpable presence within the cabin walls. Elara and Kael became each other's sole company, a silent understanding deepening between them with each passing day. Elara found herself sharing stories of Thomas, not out of morbid fascination or a need for pity, but as a visceral way to keep his memory alive, to find comfort in recounting the ordinary, cherished moments of their shared life. Kael listened patiently, his gaze empathetic and understanding, never interrupting, simply allowing her to speak, to grieve. He would occasionally offer a small, poignant detail about Thomas's last moments, a small gesture that brought her a strange, profound peace, confirming that Thomas had not died alone, unremembered, his final thoughts consumed by her. One afternoon, while methodically mending Thomas's coat, the very garment that was now a constant, bittersweet reminder, Elara found a small, almost imperceptible tear in the inner lining that she hadn't noticed before. As her fingers carefully probed the worn fabric, she felt something small and hard nestled deep within. With a careful pull, she extracted it. A tarnished, silver locket. It was the very locket she had admired in Juneau months ago, the one Thomas had promised to buy her as a future surprise. Her breath hitched in her throat, A sharp, painful gasp. He had bought it. He had carried it with him all this time, intending to surprise her upon his return. Tears streamed down her face, a fresh wave of grief washing over her, but also a profound, aching realization of his enduring love. Thomas had thought of her, even in the face of the encroaching storm, even as his life ebbed away. Kael, who had been chopping wood outside, entered the cabin then, his arms laden with fresh logs, a blast of cold air following him in. He saw the locket clutched in her trembling hand, the tears on her cheeks, and his face softened, his expression instantly mirroring her sorrow. He didn't speak. Knowing words were futile in such a moment, but his quiet presence was a powerful comfort, a silent anchor in her renewed sorrow. He simply sat beside her, allowing her to weep, a quiet testament to their growing unspoken bond, forged not in joy, but in shared hardship and a profound respect for loss. In that poignant moment, Elara realized that Kael was more than just a messenger of death. He was a witness to Thomas's last act of love, a living, breathing echo of her husband's unwavering devotion. And in turn, she had become the keeper of a new secret, a shared understanding with this stranger about the fragile, often cruel boundary between life and death in this unforgiving land. The locket was a final, deeply personal gift from Thomas, a tangible piece of their past, but Kael was a living, breathing connection to it, a vital link to the final chapter of her husband's life, and perhaps to the first chapter of her own. The first, tentative signs of spring were a subtle yet profound shift in the very fabric of the Alaskan wilderness. There was a gentle softening of the air, a faint, rhythmic trickle of water beneath the melting snow, the promise of renewal in every drip. The sun lingered longer in the sky, painting the vast expanse with hues of rose and molten gold before dipping below the horizon. With the inevitable thaw came the stark realization that Kael would soon be able to leave. The thought was bittersweet for Elara, a complex mix of apprehension and a strange, quiet longing. She had grown accustomed to his steady, quiet presence, to the unspoken companionship that had helped her navigate the darkest, most desolate days of her grief. One evening, as the last vestiges of twilight faded, Kael brought up his departure, his voice quiet, almost regretful, as if sensing her unspoken anxieties. "The trails will be passable soon," he said, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames of the fire. "The ice is breaking, the snow receding. I should head south, back to what I know, to the trappers' posts and trading routes." He looked at her then, his gaze searching, a silent question in his eyes. "I'll be able to tell others about Thomas, ensure his memory is honored among the scattered few who knew him out here." Elara nodded slowly, a tight knot forming in her stomach. The cabin, which had felt less empty, less cold with his quiet presence, would soon revert to its previous desolate state. She would be truly alone then, with only memories and the vast, indifferent wilderness for company, the silence a heavy, constant companion. But as she looked at him, truly looked at him, not just as the man who brought her tragedy, but as the man who had stayed, who had helped her survive, she saw more than just a haunted stranger. She saw a man of honor, quiet resilience, and profound strength, a man who had faced death and chosen life, and in doing so had carried a vital part of Thomas back to her. She thought of the long, lonely nights that stretched before her, the backbreaking work of surviving alone in this unforgiving wilderness. She thought of the locket, Thomas's last tangible gift, and how Kael had been the one, the only one, to bring it to her. A bold, unexpected thought began to form in her mind, a fragile spark of something beyond grief, something akin to hope. This land was harsh, unforgiving, but it also offered a fierce kind of freedom, the possibility of a new beginning, even from profound loss. She could honor Thomas by truly living, not just merely surviving. She looked at Kael again, whose eyes now held a flicker of something she couldn't quite name, something that mirrored her own quiet yearning for connection, for a shared future in the wild. Spring bloomed in full, vibrant glory, transforming the frozen landscape into a tapestry of lush green and nascent life. The air, once sharp with ice, was now filled with the sweet scent of pine sap and thawing earth, a powerful testament to nature's enduring cycle of renewal. Kael had prepared to leave, his well-worn pack ready, its contents carefully selected for the long journey south. The heavy coat that once belonged to Thomas was now a comforting, familiar presence on his broad shoulders, no longer a grim symbol, but a testament to survival and a shared history. He stood at the edge of the porch, looking out at the winding, muddy trail that led back to civilization, to the distant towns and the world beyond. Elara stood beside him, the small wooden wren Thomas had carved held tightly in her hand, its smooth surface warmed by her touch. The silence between them was profound, thick with unspoken words and shared experiences that had forged an unbreakable bond. She knew he understood. He had witnessed her deepest grief, shared her profound solitude, and brought her a final precious piece of her husband, a tangible link to his last act of love. But he had also, unknowingly, brought something else to her isolated world, the possibility of a different future, a faint yet persistent echo of hope. "Kael," she said, her voice clear and steady against the chirping of newly arrived birds and the gentle rustle of leaves. He turned, his eyes meeting hers, a question in their depths. "You don't have to leave if you don't want to." The words hung in the crisp spring air, weighted with the raw, heartfelt honesty of her soul, a bold invitation to a new chapter. This land, it's harsh, yes, but it's also beautiful, and it's home. And Thomas, he wouldn't want me to be alone. Kael looked at her, a profound, complex emotion flickering in his eyes, surprise followed by a surge of undeniable relief, and then a deep, quiet understanding. He glanced down at Thomas's coat, a brief moment of reflection, then back at Elara, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips, softening the weathered lines of his face. He knew. He had honored Thomas's last wish, a sacred trust, and now perhaps he could begin to honor a new one, to build something new from the ashes of loss, to find his own home here. The wind, no longer a mournful howl, whispered gently through the budding trees, carrying with it not an echo of despair, but the gentle, vibrant promise of a new dawn. He nodded slowly, a silent agreement to the unspoken invitation, to the echo of a new future shared in the vast wild heart of Alaska. Thank you for watching The Echo in the Snow. We hope you enjoyed this journey through grief, resilience, and the unexpected connections forged in the Alaskan wilderness. If you were moved by Elara's story, please subscribe to our channel for more compelling narratives.